I spent most of my life giving love, time, money, pieces of myself I never got back. I gave because that's what you do when you love someone. You give and you hope it means something. But one night, sitting at a dinner table in the house I paid for, I realized just how invisible I had become. The clinking of crystal glasses echoed through the room. Soft jazz floated from the speaker by the window. The smell of roasted chicken, the one I'd seasoned that morning, filled the air. It should have been a comforting sound, a warm smell. Instead, it felt like a performance I hadn't been invited to watch, let alone star in. I was there because Olivia, my son's wife, forgot to mention her parents were coming over again. "Just stay out of sight," she'd said once, laughing. "You always make things look so perfect." So I stayed, making sure everything looked perfect. The napkins folded neatly, the wine glasses spotless, the lights dimmed just right. I was halfway down the hall when her mother turned to me with a polite smile that didn't reach her eyes. "And you are?" she asked. Before I could open my mouth, Olivia spoke. "Oh, that's Elena, our unofficial maid. She keeps the place running." They laughed. All of them. Even my son. The sound sliced through me. I stood there holding the empty wine bottle I'd brought from the cellar. The one I'd paid for. The one I'd chosen because it was his favorite. I smiled, pretending it didn't hurt, pretending the ground didn't just disappear beneath my feet. I excused myself quietly, set the bottle on the counter, and walked toward my bedroom, the same one I'd painted by hand years ago when I first bought this house. The laughter followed me down the hall, light and cruel, as if I were the punchline to a joke no one would ever admit telling. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat at the edge of the bed, staring at the door I had once painted blue to make the room feel like peace. I thought about the day I'd signed the mortgage, my name on every paper, my credit, my down payment. Ethan had just graduated from college back then. Olivia wasn't even in the picture. They had nothing. I gave them everything. And somehow I ended up as the maid. When morning came, I made coffee like I always did. Habit has a way of holding you together when your heart is falling apart. I fed the cat Olivia pretended to care about. Then she came downstairs, scrolling through her phone, not even looking up. I waited. She finally noticed me. I held out the house keys, all of them. The front, the back, the garage, even the mailbox. "What's this?" she asked, frowning. I smiled softly. "Good luck paying the mortgage." She blinked, confused. "What?" I didn't answer. I just walked down the hall past the framed photos I'd hung, the furniture I'd chosen, the walls I'd painted. I didn't take a thing. Not a single photo, not a single memory. Just my purse and the coat I'd worn the day I brought Ethan home from the hospital. He called after me as I opened the door. His voice cracked when he said my name, but I didn't stop. I didn't slam the car door either. I closed it gently, calmly, because something inside me had snapped, not in anger, not in grief, but in clarity. And clarity doesn't scream. It whispers. It simply says, enough. As I drove away, I saw him in the rearview mirror, barefoot in the driveway, confusion written all over his face. He had no idea what he'd just lost. And neither did I. They say you don't realize you were drowning until you finally breathe. That night, alone in the tiny apartment my Aunt Ruth once left me, I breathed for the first time in years. It didn't feel like freedom yet, it felt like silence. Heavy, echoing silence. The kind that settles into your bones and asks, "Who are you now?" I didn't know the answer. Not yet. But for the first time, I was ready to find out. The apartment smelled like time, old wood, dust, and something faintly floral that reminded me of Aunt Ruth's hand cream. The wallpaper had yellowed at the corners, and the floor creaked like it was sighing with every step I took. I dropped my bag on the table and stood still, staring at the chipped tiles in the kitchen. For the first time in decades, no one needed me. No one called my name. No one expected dinner or help or anything at all. You'd think that would feel like freedom. It didn't. It felt like standing in an empty room where even your own breathing sounds too loud. I slept on the couch because the bed frame in the bedroom was broken. I ate peanut butter sandwiches and microwaved soup for days, not because I couldn't cook, but because I couldn't care. The silence pressed against me like a weight. Every hour felt too long. Every night too cold. Ethan didn't call. Not once. I kept waiting for the phone to light up with his name, for a knock at the door, for some sign that he realized what he'd done. But the days turned into weeks, and the silence only deepened. Maybe Olivia told him not to reach out. Or maybe he didn't need to be told. I used to believe a mother's love could fill every silence, bridge every distance. But silence has a voice of its own, and it's honest, brutally honest. It tells you who really cares and who only cares when you're convenient. At night, I started writing again. Old notebooks I'd kept in boxes for years, the kind with bent corners and coffee stains. I filled page after page, not for anyone else but for me. Words became my company when no one else showed up. I wrote down memories I tried to bury, the laughter that cut too deep, the kindnesses that went unnoticed, the way I used to stand in the kitchen and wait for my son to say thank you. I wrote about the nights I'd cried quietly in the garage while they went out to dinner without me, about pretending to be asleep so I wouldn't hear them mocking my TV shows from the living room I paid for. Writing didn't heal me, but it stopped me from falling apart. One night, while looking for a light bulb in the storage closet, I found an old metal trunk, the one Aunt Ruth used to keep under her sewing table. I had to pry it open. The hinges were rusted shut. Inside were envelopes, yellowed and brittle, and one on top was addressed to me. If you're reading this, it means you've come back. And I'm sorry you had to. My hands shook as I unfolded the letter. Ruth's handwriting was small, careful. The pages were full of hospital forms, photocopies, and a photograph of a newborn wrapped in a hospital blanket. A boy. Not Ethan. There was a name on the form, Michael Jameson. I read the letter 3 times before the words made sense. Ruth had been a nurse at the hospital where I gave birth. She wrote that something about that night had haunted her, a last-minute room switch, confusion with the tags on the bassinets. By the time anyone realized, the babies were gone, sent home with the wrong mothers. She'd found proof years later, a quiet settlement, documents buried deep in the hospital's archives, and she kept them, afraid of what they might mean. Ethan wasn't my son. The words sat there on the page like an open wound. My first reaction wasn't disbelief. It was stillness. I just stared at the photo, at the name written beside it, and for the first time in years, something inside me clicked into place. I didn't feel rage. I didn't feel grief. I felt relief. Not because I didn't love Ethan, but because suddenly, all those years of distance and coldness made sense. The ache that never went away had a reason. I stayed up all night reading every scrap of paper in that trunk. Hospital memos. Settlement forms. A newspaper clipping about the Jameson family, respected, local, still living in town. My real son had been here all along, growing up just a few miles away. When the sun rose, I folded everything neatly and placed it in my nightstand. Then I stood in front of the mirror and looked at myself. The woman staring back didn't look broken anymore. She looked awake. For the first time in my life, I wasn't just a mother or a giver or a shadow in someone else's home. I was a woman standing in the middle of her own story, and for once, I wasn't afraid of what came next. There's a silence that punishes, and then there's a silence that teaches. Mine was finally starting to teach me who I was without them. The days after finding Ruth's letter felt unreal, like I was walking through someone else's life, wearing my own skin. Every sound in that apartment seemed louder. The hum of the old heater, the clink of my coffee spoon, the echo of my footsteps on the uneven floor. It was as if the walls were whispering, "You know now. You can't unknow it." I kept rereading her words, tracing each line with my finger like I could touch the truth through the paper. She had written everything in that calm, nurse's handwriting, measured, controlled, almost apologetic. She said she had doubts that night in the hospital, that something wasn't right when the nurse switched the bassinets. She said she spoke up, but no one listened. It was chaos. 2 mothers, 2 newborns, 1 last-minute transfer. Then, years later, she found documents buried in her files. Quiet settlements. Confidential agreements. It was all there, the proof she'd been too scared to face. I sat at the table surrounded by papers that didn't just rewrite Ethan's life. They rewrote mine. I wasn't just a woman who'd lost respect in her own home. I was a woman who had raised the wrong child. At first, the thought crushed me. But then it started to make sense of everything that had never made sense before. The coldness, the distance, the way he'd always looked at me like I was slightly out of focus in his world. Maybe it wasn't that he stopped loving me. Maybe he never truly could, because deep down, we weren't connected in the way I thought we were. That realization didn't hurt. It healed. Because it meant I hadn't failed as a mother. I had loved a child who wasn't mine, and I loved him anyway. That wasn't weakness. That was grace. I spent hours going through Ruth's old papers, every one of them yellowed and fragile, but full of clarity. She had made copies of everything: birth logs, DNA results, and even a short article about the Jamesons, the family who had unknowingly taken home my son. They still lived in town. My son, Michael Jameson, had grown up only a few miles away. I stared at his name until it didn't look like words anymore. I imagined him as a boy, messy hair, scraped knees, laughing in a house filled with the kind of love I thought I had given. I wondered if he ever felt the same hollow ache Ethan gave me, that quiet sense of something missing he couldn't explain. Maybe we had both been living with that emptiness all along. For days, I didn't know what to do. The truth sat inside me like a living thing, breathing, waiting. I wasn't ready to tell anyone. Not Ethan. Not the Jamesons. Not even myself, really. I carried the knowledge like a fragile secret, something that could shatter if spoken too soon. At night, I'd spread the papers across my table and reread them under the dim kitchen light. I'd whisper his name sometimes, just to hear how it sounded. Michael. It felt strange on my tongue, unfamiliar, yet deeply mine. I started researching him quietly, cautiously. A few online searches. Local directories. It didn't take long to find him. He owned a small bookstore downtown. Jameson's Books, painted in elegant gold lettering on a green storefront. The first time I saw a photo of the shop, I froze. It looked like something out of my dreams, warm, quiet, full of stories waiting to be opened. And he was there in one of the photos, standing behind the counter with a gentle smile. He looked nothing like Ethan, but there was something in his eyes, steady, calm, thoughtful, something that looked like mine. I printed out the photo and slipped it into my notebook. I didn't know what I was going to do yet. I just knew I couldn't go back to who I'd been before I found that trunk. In the silence of that small apartment, something inside me shifted. I wasn't broken anymore. I was awakening, like a woman who had been living in a story written by someone else and suddenly realized she could pick up the pen. Ruth's letter hadn't just changed my past. It had given me a future, one built on truth, not illusion. I poured myself a cup of coffee and stood by the window, looking out at the gray morning. The city felt different now, like it was holding a secret just for me. Somewhere out there was the son I never got to hold, and the son I thought was mine, who had laughed while his wife called me a maid. The contrast between them was a mirror, one reflecting what love is, the other showing what love isn't. I didn't know which one I would face first. But I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't done yet. The morning I finally left the apartment and drove across town, I wasn't sure what I was looking for. Maybe courage, maybe closure. All I knew was that I couldn't just sit in that silence anymore, surrounded by papers and ghosts. I needed to see him, Michael. His bookstore sat on a corner between a florist and an old cafe, the kind of place that looked like it had existed forever. The sign above the door read Jameson's Books, painted in deep green with gold trim. Through the window, I could see rows of shelves, stacks of paperbacks, and warm light spilling across wooden floors. And there he was. He looked exactly like his photograph, gentle eyes, calm posture, a quiet steadiness about him. He was helping a young woman find a poetry book, his expression patient, kind. I stood across the street, my heart pounding, every muscle trembling. He was my son. And I was a stranger. I didn't go in. Not that day. I couldn't. Instead, I sat on a bench across from the shop, pretending to drink from a coffee cup that had gone cold hours ago. I watched him arrange books, talk to customers, laugh softly at something someone said. Every small movement of his felt like a revelation. I went back the next day. And the day after that. It became a quiet ritual, my own kind of mourning and healing. I'd walk by, linger for a few minutes, sometimes buy a coffee from the cafe next door, sometimes just sit and watch. I wasn't stalking him. I was learning him, learning the kind of man he'd become without me. I started to notice his patterns. When the morning deliveries arrived, how he locked up at night, the way he'd stop to talk to the woman from the flower shop every afternoon. He lived a life rooted in kindness, the kind that didn't need to be announced. It was just there, woven into him. And every time I saw that, the way he smiled at a child who dropped their ice cream, the way he held the door for strangers, I felt something loosen in my chest. For the first time in a long while, I felt proud. Meanwhile, back in the world I'd left behind, Ethan and Olivia's perfect little life was starting to unravel, though they didn't know I was watching that too. Olivia's social media was full of photos of brunches, yoga classes, designer handbags, the kind of glossy lies she built her world on. But beneath it all, cracks were forming. I'd learned that the house was still under my name. Olivia had tried to refinance without my permission and was denied. Ethan had quit his job months ago. They were living on credit cards and arrogance. I didn't tell anyone what I knew. Not yet. Instead, I started a second notebook. Not like the first, that one was full of pain and memories. This one was strategy. I wrote down everything: names, dates, financial records, even Olivia's business information. I started looking up public filings, business registrations, tax forms. Her company, Olivia Sens, was all smoke and mirrors, fake partnerships, unpaid taxes, inflated numbers. I didn't need revenge. I just needed the truth. And this time, I was keeping it. Each day, I split myself between two worlds. In the mornings, I watched Michael from across the street, quiet, steady, unknowingly reminding me of the kind of love that still existed in the world. In the evenings, I gathered facts, line by line, document by document, about the house and the life Ethan and Olivia had built on my sacrifices. I wasn't trying to destroy them. I just wanted to reclaim the parts of me they had stolen. One rainy afternoon, I finally stepped inside the bookstore. My heart raced as I pushed the door open, the bell chiming softly above me. Michael looked up from behind the counter and smiled. "Hi there. Let me know if you need help finding something." His voice, warm, calm, patient, made me freeze. I managed a nod and wandered through the aisles, pretending to browse. My hands shook as I traced the spines of books I'd once read to Ethan. After a few minutes, I picked up a novel and brought it to the counter. "Good choice," he said, scanning it. "Not many people know this one." I smiled faintly. I've always liked stories that feel real. He handed me the bag, our fingers brushing for a brief second. "You own this place?" I asked, my voice quieter than I meant it to be. "Sort of," he said with a shy grin. "My parents helped me get started. They're retired now, so I keep it running." Of course they helped. Of course he had support. It made sense, the kind of steady love that raises steady people. I walked out into the drizzle, clutching the book like it was proof that I hadn't imagined him. I sat in my car for a long time, staring through the rain-streaked windshield, whispering his name again. Michael. He was kind. He was good. And he had no idea his whole life had started with a mistake. That night, I opened my notebook and wrote a single line. "I will tell him, but not yet." Because I knew there were two truths I still needed to face: the son I had lost and the one I had raised. One represented love I never got to give. The other, love that had been taken for granted. And before I could reach for the new, I had to let go of the old. But not in anger. In clarity. Because by then I'd learned something. Silence can destroy you when you live inside it, but it can also protect you while you plan your way out. And I was finally planning not to survive them, but to rise above them. There's a kind of calm that comes after heartbreak, not peace exactly, but a silence that hums with purpose. That's what I felt when I sat at my kitchen table one cold Tuesday morning, my laptop open, a stack of documents beside me. I'd been watching, waiting, gathering. And now I finally had enough. I didn't want revenge. I wanted restoration. to take back what was mine, not out of anger, but because I finally understood my worth. The house was still in my name. Every signature, every payment, every repair, all mine. Ethan and Olivia had built their lives on it, assuming I'd always be too soft to take it away. They were wrong. I made an appointment with a lawyer downtown. A woman named Diane, sharp eyes, steady tone. No small talk. She listened as I explained everything. The house, the mortgage, the humiliation, the silence that followed. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair and said, "You've waited long enough, Elena. Let's make this right." By the end of the week, the paperwork was filed. That evening, I walked past the house for the first time since I'd left it. The porch light was on. Through the window, I saw Olivia curled on the couch, phone in one hand, wine glass in the other. Ethan was slouched beside her, face lit by the blue glow of a video game. It looked like a life, but it wasn't living. I didn't go to the door. I just watched for a minute, the air sharp in my lungs, and then turned away. Sometimes closure doesn't come with confrontation. Sometimes it's just the moment you realize you no longer belong in a place that once held your entire world. A week later, my lawyer told me the notice had been sent. The house would be listed for sale. All proceeds would go to me. Legally, ethically, completely. The morning they received the papers, I was sitting in a cafe near the courthouse, stirring honey into my tea. My phone buzzed.
Ethan.
I let it ring. Then it buzzed again, a text this time. "Mom, what are you doing?
Please call me.
Olivia is freaking out." I didn't reply. I didn't need to. Some things speak louder in silence. The next day, there was another call, this time from Olivia. I didn't answer her either, but I listened to the voicemail. Her voice trembled under forced calm. "Elena, we really need to talk. This is a misunderstanding. Ethan says you're going through something, and we just want to help you. But this, you're putting our lives at risk. It's not fair." Not fair. I listened to that part twice. The same woman who once called me, the maid, was now begging the maid for mercy. 2 days later, there was a knock at my apartment door. I looked through the peephole.
Ethan.
He looked nothing like the man I'd left standing barefoot in the driveway. His hair was uncombed, dark circles under his eyes. He knocked softly, almost afraid. "Mom," he said. "Please, can we talk?" I stood on the other side of the door, hand resting on the knob, heart steady. I didn't open it. Not yet. He needed to sit in that silence, the same silence he'd left me in for weeks. He knocked again, then sighed, his voice cracking. "Mom, please don't do this." I turned away and walked back to the couch, leaving him standing there with nothing but the sound of his own guilt. The next week, my lawyer called. Everything was finalized. The house would be sold within the month. I would receive every cent. Olivia tried to contest it, claimed she'd added value to the property. My lawyer smiled and said, "Then she can prove it in court." Of course, she couldn't. Her only contribution had been staged photos and unpaid bills. And as their perfect image began to crumble, so did the illusion of their life. Olivia's business, Olivia Ascends, started falling apart. Clients backed out, sponsorships vanished. Her curated social media feed turned quiet, her motivational quotes replaced by excuses and vague statements about personal growth through challenges. People saw through it. They always do, eventually. One night, an old neighbor messaged me. She still followed Olivia online. "You won't believe this," she wrote. Olivia's mother stormed out of her house screaming on the phone. Something about lies and money.
I didn't respond.
I just closed my laptop and smiled, not from satisfaction, but from justice finally balancing itself. Still, I hadn't forgotten why I started this. It wasn't to destroy them. It was to reclaim myself, the woman I'd buried under years of service and silence. So, while their world fell apart, I kept building mine. I kept visiting the bookstore, seeing Michael now and then, each meeting a little less terrifying, a little more natural. We talk about books, about music, about life. He didn't know who I was yet, but being near him felt like breathing fresh air after years of holding it in. Every night, I go home and write in my new notebook. Not lists or evidence anymore, but plans, reflections, small pieces of hope. The woman who'd once begged for kindness now knew she didn't need permission to take up space. And when the house finally sold, I didn't celebrate with champagne or revenge. I lit a candle, made a cup of tea, and whispered to myself, "You're free now." It wasn't loud.
It didn't need to be.
Freedom doesn't always roar. Sometimes it just exhales. It took me 3 days to decide how to tell him. 3 days of pacing the apartment, practicing words that never sounded right once they left my mouth. "I'm your mother. There was a mistake. Your life was never meant to be this one." Every version sounded like it would ruin both of us. I tried rehearsing in front of the mirror. Tried saying it out loud while driving, while waiting in line at the grocery store, whispering into the hum of everyday life. Nothing worked. The truth was too heavy to lift cleanly. But one morning I woke up, made my coffee, and knew there wasn't going to be a perfect way to say it, only a true one. When I walked into Jameson's books, the air smelled faintly of paper and rain. The golden light through the front windows fell across the floor like warmth you could touch. Michael looked up from behind the counter, his reading glasses slipping down his nose, and smiled that easy, kind smile I'd memorized from afar.
"Hey," he said.
"You came at a good time. We just got a new shipment of poetry collections." I swallowed, forcing my voice steady. "Actually, I came to talk." Something in my tone made him pause. He studied me quietly, eyes gentle but curious.
"Sure," he said.
"Come on back." He led me through a small door behind the counter, into a cozy break room, a chipped wooden table, 2 mismatched chairs, and a kettle humming softly on the counter. It smelled like peppermint tea and old stories. We sat. For a long moment, I just stared at my hands, the veins and lines that told the story of every sacrifice I'd ever made. When I finally spoke, my voice was low, trembling but certain. "I've been coming here for a reason," I said. He nodded slightly, as if he'd known there was something behind my visits. I figured. "You don't exactly strike me as a casual browser." I smiled faintly. "No, I suppose not." I reached into my purse and pulled out the envelope, the one with Ruth's letter, the birth records, and the DNA results. I placed it on the table between us. "What's that?" he asked softly. "Something that's about to change everything." He didn't move, just waited, patient and calm, the way he always seemed to be. 30 years ago, I began. There was a mistake at the hospital where I gave birth. 2 babies were switched. The words barely came out. I watched confusion cross his face, a mix of disbelief and quiet concern. "I raised a son who wasn't mine," I continued, forcing the words past the lump in my throat. "And another woman, she raised the one who was." He froze, staring at the envelope. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying," I exhaled slowly, "you're my son, Michael." For a long, endless moment, he didn't say a thing. The air between us grew thick with silence. He finally reached out, hesitating before touching the envelope like it might burn him. He opened it one paper at a time. Ruth's letter, the records, the photo of the newborn. His eyes moved across the pages, widening slightly with every line. When he finished, he didn't look at me right away. He just sat there, fingers still resting on the papers. "This is a lot," he said finally. "I know. And you're Elena?" "Yes." He nodded slowly, his face unreadable. I don't know what I'm supposed to feel." "You don't have to feel anything right now," I said softly. "I didn't come here to ask for anything. I just needed you to know." He leaned back, rubbing a hand over his face, letting out a shaky breath. "I have parents. They raised me. I love them." "I know," I said. "And I would never ask you not to." We sat there in that tiny room surrounded by the smell of books and tea, 2 people trying to find footing on a floor that had just shifted beneath them. "I'm not angry," he said finally, looking up at me. "Just stunned." "That's fair." He stared at the papers again, tracing the edges absently. "She kept this secret her whole life, your aunt?" I nodded. "She wanted to protect me." Maybe herself, too. He was quiet for a moment. Then, almost whispering, "You must have gone through hell." I blinked hard, caught off guard by the kindness in his voice. "It's been a long road." He nodded, his eyes glassy but steady. "You didn't have to come. But you did." "I didn't know how not to," I admitted. He gave a small, fragile smile. "Then maybe we start there." I felt the tears before I could stop them. Quiet, grateful ones that didn't sting this time. "I'd like that." He hesitated, then said softly, "Can we take it slow? I don't want to rush into something just because it's true on paper." I reached across the table, not to touch him, just to bridge the distance with words. "I wouldn't ask for anything else." He smiled, a real one this time. "You want tea?" I let out a shaky laugh. "I'd love some." So we sat there, two strangers who weren't strangers at all, sipping peppermint tea as the world outside went on like nothing had changed. But for me, everything had. The truth wasn't just out in the open, it was breathing, alive, no longer something I had to carry alone. And as I left the bookstore that day, I realized something I hadn't understood until then. Sometimes, the truth doesn't set you free in a single moment. Sometimes, it frees you little by little, with every word you no longer have to keep secret. By the time autumn arrived, the air had begun to change, sharper, cleaner, full of endings disguised as beginnings. The house sold faster than anyone expected. I got the full asking price, and the money went straight into my account. It didn't feel like winning. It felt like reclaiming oxygen after years of breathing through someone else's lungs. Ethan and Olivia had 30 days to move out.
No extensions. No exceptions.
I drove past once, just to see. The movers were hauling boxes down the driveway. Olivia was outside, sunglasses hiding whatever pride she had left, barking orders at the men carrying her designer furniture. Ethan stood on the lawn, staring at the ground, phone pressed to his ear. A man who finally realized that pretending wasn't the same thing as building. I didn't stop. I didn't roll down the window. I just watched from a distance as the life they'd built on borrowed time unraveled piece by piece. Their fall wasn't dramatic, no shouting, no scandals, no public breakdowns. It was quiet, inevitable, and complete. Olivia's parents cut her off financially. Her business dissolved under the weight of lies. The glossy posts disappeared from her page, replaced with silence. Ethan tried to get work, any work, but doors don't open easily for men who've never learned to stand on their own. I didn't feel joy watching it happen, only closure, because it wasn't about punishment, it was about balance. Meanwhile, my world was rebuilding itself in small, steady ways. I kept seeing Michael. Nothing big, nothing forced. Coffee at the bookstore. Conversations about old novels and childhood memories. He'd tell me about his customers, about the quiet beauty of his days, and sometimes, when he wasn't thinking about it, he'd smile in a way that made my heart ache with recognition. He still didn't call me Mom. I never asked him to. Some words need time. Some may never come. And that's okay. One afternoon, he asked about my writing. I told him I'd started working on something, a memoir, maybe. Not to publish, just to remember. He smiled and said, "You should. Stories like that matter." And maybe they do. A few weeks later, I got a message from Ethan. Just one line.
"Can we meet?"
Just once. I hesitated for days before saying yes. We met at a small park on the edge of town, a place with peeling benches and a pond that had dried to a shallow mirror of its old self. I chose it because it held no memories.
He was already there when I arrived. Thinner, tired, a little lost.
He looked up as I approached. "I'm not here to ask for anything," he said quickly. I nodded. "Good." He rubbed his hands together, eyes on the ground. I wanted to understand. I took a deep breath and handed him the envelope I'd kept, the same one I'd shown Michael. "It's all in here," I said. He didn't open it right away. Just held it, like it weighed more than it should. "I did my own test," he said quietly. "Same result." I nodded. He swallowed hard. "I spent weeks thinking, if I'm not your son, then what was I?" I looked at him, really looked, The man who once was a boy I'd carried, fed, fought for.
You were my child, I said.
I loved you the only way I knew how. But when love turns into duty, and duty turns into silence, something breaks. He flinched, his voice low. I thought I was protecting Olivia. I thought standing by her made me strong. You weren't protecting her, I said gently. You were hiding behind her. He nodded, tears threatening but held back. I wish I could undo it. You can't, I said softly. But you can learn from it. That's all any of us can do. He took a shaky breath. I don't want forgiveness.
Then don't ask for it, I said.
Just be honest with yourself. That's enough. He nodded again. I hope he's good to you, he murmured.
Who? Michael, he said.
Your son. For the first time, I smiled. He's kind. Ethan's expression softened. I guess some of that came from you then. We both laughed, tired, bittersweet, but real. When he stood to leave, he hesitated. If there's ever space for me, even just a little corner. I placed my hand lightly on his shoulder. We'll see. And that was it. Not forgiveness. Not erasure. Just understanding. Sometimes that's all the ending you get, and sometimes it's enough. It was early winter when Michael called me. His voice was casual, but there was a spark beneath it. Can you come by tomorrow morning? He asked. I want to show you something. The next day, I stepped into the bookstore. The light inside was golden, soft, dust floating like tiny ghosts in the air. He was standing near the back wall, where a new wooden sign hung above an arched doorway. The next chapter. I smiled. What's this? He handed me a small brass key. It's a new section I'm opening. A reading room, coffee corner, a place for people to feel like they belong. I turned the key over in my hand. And you want me to open it? He looked at me, not as a stranger, not as an obligation, but as something else entirely. I want you to have it, he said simply. I blinked, caught off guard. You don't have to. I know, he said, smiling softly. But I want to. I walked to the door beneath the sign and slid the key into the lock. It turned easily, like it had been waiting. The door opened into a warm, sunlit room, shelves along the walls, a worn rug in the center, a cozy armchair beside a small table with a teapot already waiting. It felt like stepping into a dream I'd forgotten I had. I turned to him, tears blurring my vision. He smiled. Consider it yours for as long as you want it. I couldn't speak. I just nodded, standing in that doorway, breathing in the scent of wood, paper, and new beginnings. That night, back in my apartment, I opened my notebook, the last page still blank. I picked up my pen and wrote. I was a woman who gave until I vanished. Then I became the woman who took it all back, not with anger, not with revenge, but with truth, silence, and strength no one saw coming. I closed the notebook and smiled. The next morning, I transferred part of the money from the house sale to a foundation that helps women starting over, women who've been silenced, underestimated, dismissed. They called to thank me. But I didn't need thanks. Because every time I walked into that bookstore, into the next chapter, I remembered who I had become. Not Ethan's mother. Not Olivia's maid. Not a woman defined by loss or sacrifice. Just Elena Hart, a woman who finally found her voice, her freedom, and her door. And this time, it opened to her own story. Let us know in the comments where are you watching from, and subscribe to the channel Her Side of the Story. Thanks for watching until here.